Text message came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway the way I do most nights now that the house is quiet. It was from my daughter. "Dad, I saw your Instagram. That cabin looks expensive. We should talk. Are you free for dinner Saturday? Come to Riverside Grill. And Dad, I'm going to need you to bring a check. $180,000. We'll explain everything when you get there." I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling for a long time. My daughter, Ivy, 34 years old, hadn't returned a phone call in 4 years. Let me back up because you need to understand what those 4 years look like. When my wife, Pauline, passed away in the spring of 2019, I expected grief. I did not expect to be invisible. Ivy flew in for the funeral, stayed 2 nights, and left before we'd even finished sorting through her mother's things. Her husband, Scott, shook my hand at the reception with the kind of grip men use when they want you to know they're doing you a favor just by showing up. That was the last time I saw either of them in person. I called. For the first year, I called every Sunday. That had been our family tradition since Ivy went off to college in Charlotte. Sometimes it went to voicemail. Sometimes she'd pick up and the conversation would last 4 minutes before she said she had to go. Scott was waiting, they had plans, she'd call me back. She never called back. My son, Miles, lives out in Boise with his wife and 2 kids. He checked in regularly, drove down to Roanoke to see me twice a year, made sure I was eating. But Miles has his own life, a mortgage, twins in elementary school. I didn't want to become a burden to the child who had actually shown up, so I learned to be alone. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as an engineer for a utility company in Virginia, lived below my means, invested consistently, and when Pauline died, she left behind a life insurance policy that, combined with what I'd already built, put me in a position I never quite expected to be in. I am not a wealthy man by certain standards, but I am comfortable in a way that would have shocked the version of me who grew up sharing a bedroom with 2 brothers in a row house in Pittsburgh. Last spring, I bought a cabin. It's nothing extravagant. 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, about 40 minutes outside of Roanoke in the Blue Ridge foothills. I'd been thinking about it for years. Pauline and I used to talk about having a place in the mountains where the grandchildren could visit someday. After she died, I put the idea away. Then, slowly, I started taking it back out. I closed on the property in March, in a moment that I now recognize as the single most consequential mistake of my recent life. I posted 3 photos on Instagram. The porch view, the stacked stone fireplace, and yes, the price, because a friend had commented asking what something like that ran, and I replied directly in the comments, $162,000. Ivy saw it. I didn't respond to the text that night. I needed to think. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from being wanted only when you are worth something. I had felt versions of it before. The colleague who only remembers your name when he needs a reference, the neighbor who waves from across the yard until he wants to borrow the truck, but nothing prepares you for it from your own child. Nothing in any book I ever read, nothing any well-meaning friend ever said at a grief support group, nothing comes close to the particular hollowness of sitting in a dark bedroom at midnight, reading a text from your daughter that is at its core a transaction, 4 years of silence, then a number. By Wednesday morning I had made a decision. I was not going to simply say no, and I was not going to simply say yes. I was going to go to that dinner. But I was going to be ready. I called my attorney, a woman named Pat Holloway who had handled Pauline's estate and whom I trusted more than almost anyone. I told her about the text. She was quiet for a moment. "How long has it been since you've had real contact with Ivy?" she asked. 4 years, I said, give or take. Another pause, and this is the first reach out, the first that wasn't a birthday text with a gif. I heard her exhale. "All right, come in Thursday. We have some things to talk about." I drove to Pat's office Thursday morning with a folder I'd put together the night before. Account statements, the cabin deed, my existing will, a rough outline of everything I owned and where it sat. Pauline had been meticulous about records, and I had kept up the habit. Pat spread everything across her conference table, and we spent 2 hours going through it. "Here's what concerns me," Pat said, leaning back in her chair. "You're planning to go to this dinner. You're going to sit across from your daughter and her husband, And somewhere in that conversation, they are going to make a demand. If you say no, there's a chance Scott escalates. He could claim undue influence, mental incapacity, any number of things. You're 63, you're recently widowed, you're living alone. Those are the checkboxes a certain kind of attorney looks for. Can he actually get anywhere with that? Probably not. But probably not still means depositions, legal fees, stress, time. It means your finances become public record in a courthouse. She tapped the folder. Or we get ahead of it. She walked me through the options. A revocable living trust offered flexibility but limited protection. What she recommended, what she had actually been recommending I look at since Pauline's estate closed, was moving a significant portion of my assets into a charitable remainder trust. The way it works, she explained, is that I would transfer assets into the trust, designate a non-profit as the ultimate beneficiary, and in return receive an income stream for the remainder of my life. The assets in the trust would be effectively removed from my taxable estate and, critically, from the reach of anyone who might later try to contest a will or claim inheritance. Once it's funded and irrevocable, Pat said, there's nothing to contest. There's no pot of money sitting in your name waiting to be litigated over. It's gone from your estate. Legally gone. How long does it take? I can have the documents ready by Friday. We'd need to fund it before your dinner Saturday. I looked at the folder on the table. Pauline's handwriting was on one of the tabs. She'd labelled it in black marker, neat capital letters the way she always did. I thought about how she used to say that money was just a tool and that the only thing that mattered was what you built with it. Do it, I said. I spent Friday gathering documents, transferring the relevant accounts, signing papers in Pat's office while her paralegal notarized everything. By 4 in the afternoon, $310,000 in mutual fund holdings, and the cabin property itself had been transferred into a charitable remainder trust, naming the Boys and Girls Club of Southwest Virginia as the remainder beneficiary, an organization Pauline had volunteered with for 11 years. What remained in my personal accounts was enough to live well for the rest of my life, enough for Miles's kids' college funds, which I'd already set aside separately in 529 accounts in their names, enough that I would never need to ask anyone for anything. What was not there, $180,000 in immediately accessible cash that my daughter and her husband could pressure me into handing over. I went home, made a pot of chili, and watched the news. I slept better than I had in months. Saturday I arrived at Riverside Grill 10 minutes early. It's a nice restaurant, not flashy, but the kind of place with white tablecloths and a serious wine list, the kind of place someone chooses when they want the setting to do some of the persuading for them. I'd been there before, years ago, with Pauline for our anniversary. I asked the host for the table Ivy had reserved, ordered a sparkling water and waited. They came in at 7 on the dot. Ivy looked, I don't know how to describe it, she looked like herself, which was the strange part. Same dark hair, same way of tilting her chin up slightly when she entered a room. She looked healthy. She looked like someone who had been living a full life somewhere I wasn't part of. Scott was behind her, one hand at the small of her back, wearing the expression of a man who had rehearsed something. Dad. She hugged me briefly. The kind of hug that communicates obligation rather than warmth. A slight lean-in, a pat on the shoulder. Ivy, I said. Scott my hand. The same grip as the funeral. Nothing had changed. We sat. A server came, took drink orders, recited the specials. There was a stretch of surface conversation. How was the drive? Wasn't the weather nice? This place had good salmon. Did I know they renovated the bar? I answered what was asked. I watched my daughter avoid my eyes. Finally, after the bread came, Scott cleared his throat. So, he said, I imagine you know why we wanted to get together. You mentioned in the text you needed to talk, I said. So let's talk. Ivy glanced at Scott. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, and she seemed to take that as permission to begin. Dad, we've been going through a hard time, financially. She folded her napkin carefully. Scott's business has had some setbacks. We're behind on the house, and there's a balloon payment coming up on a second mortgage we took out 2 years ago. It's a lot. We're looking at potentially losing the house. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And I was. Whatever I felt about the years of silence, I did not take pleasure in the idea of my daughter losing her home. We were hoping, Ivy continued, that you could help us. The text I sent, the $180,000, that would cover the balloon payment and give us a cushion to get back on our feet. I looked at her, then at Scott, then back at her. When did you find out about the cabin? I asked. The question landed the way I intended it to. A small silence. I follow you on Instagram, Ivy said carefully. You follow me on Instagram, I repeated. But not on the phone, not in person. Not at Thanksgiving, not at Christmas, not when I had that health scare 2 years ago that Miles told you about. She set the napkin down. Dad, I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. I want you to know that. I'm not sitting here wanting to punish you, but I need to understand something before we go any further. Are you here because you want a relationship with me? Or are you here because you saw a number on Instagram? Scott made a small sound, not quite a word. I looked at him. With respect, he said, and men who begin sentences with respect rarely mean it. That's not really a fair question. Family helps family. Family alt calls, I said. Family also shows up. The table was quiet. A server passed, refilled water glasses, moved on. Ivy looked down at the breadbasket. When she looked up, something in her face had shifted. Not softened exactly, but cracked slightly, like there was something underneath trying to get out. I know I haven't been around, she said quietly. Things with Scott and me have been. It's been a stressful few years. I didn't handle it well. I know that. I appreciate you saying that. I did. I truly did. I want you to know the door has always been open. It still is. Scott leaned forward. So you'll help us? And there it was. The moment where grievance becomes leverage, where the apology is less about repair and more about paving the road to yes. I said the door is open, I told him. That's different from writing a check. Scott's expression shifted. He reached into the jacket he'd hung on the back of his chair and pulled out a piece of paper, a number of pages actually, folded together. He set them on the table. Our attorney put this together, he said. It outlines what we believe is a reasonable family support agreement. The $180,000 structured as a gift, plus ongoing monthly contributions of $4,500 for 24 months while we stabilize. In exchange, we commit to regular family contact, dinners twice monthly, etc. I looked at the papers without touching them. A contract. They had brought a contract. There was a time in my life. When I was younger, when I needed people to think well of me. When I confused keeping the peace with being good. When I might have looked at those pages and started negotiating. Tried to find the version of this that everyone could live with. That time has passed. Scott, I said, I have something for you too. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and placed a single folded document on the table beside his papers. He looked at it. What is that? It's a letter from my attorney, I said, summarizing the disposition of my estate as of yesterday afternoon. Ivy's eyes dropped to the paper. Earlier this week, I said, I established a charitable remainder trust. The trust is funded with the majority of my investment holdings and the cabin property. It's irrevocable. The income from the trust comes to me for the rest of my life, and at my death, the remainder goes to the Boys and Girls Club, an organization your mother spent 11 years of her life supporting. I paused. There is no lump sum. There is no estate to inherit or advance against. What's in that trust cannot be accessed, transferred, gifted, or litigated. It is not mine to give. The silence was different from the earlier ones. This one had weight. Scott picked up the letter. He read the first paragraph, then the second. His jaw tightened. You did this specifically too, he started. I did this because it was the right financial and estate planning decision, I said. I had been meaning to do it for 2 years. Your text on Tuesday was the reminder I needed to stop putting it off. Ivy was staring at me. Her eyes were bright in a way I recognized. She used to look that way as a little girl when she was trying not to cry, but was very close to the edge. Dad, she said. Her voice was different now. Quieter. I love you, Ivy. Ivy, I said. I mean that. I have loved you every day of the last 4 years, even when I didn't hear from you. Even when I sat alone on your mother's birthday and no one called. Even when Miles had to be the one to tell me whether you were alive and well, because I had no other way of knowing. I kept my voice steady. But love is not a currency. I will not be charged admission to have a relationship with my own daughter. Scott pushed back slightly from the table. You realize this is going to create serious problems. For whom? I asked. We could challenge this, he said. You're recently widowed, you're isolated, there's an argument for undue influence. You're welcome to bring that argument to court, I said. My attorney will enjoy explaining to a judge that I executed this trust with full capacity, documented counsel, and no external pressure, 3 days before a dinner I hadn't yet attended. I looked at him steadily. I have the timestamps. Ivy put her hand over her mouth. I turned to her. The door is open, I said again. Genuinely, not because of money and not for money. If you want to have a father, I am here. I will always be here. But if the only version of me you want is the version that writes checks, then I think you already know what to do with that. I picked up my menu. Now, I said, I hear the salmon is excellent. Scott left before the entrees came. He said something about a phone call he needed to make, took his jacket from the chair, and walked out with the folded papers still in his hand. Ivy stayed. We sat there, the two of us, with the white tablecloth and the low lighting and the sound of other people's evenings moving around us. She ordered the salmon. I ordered the steak. We talked, haltingly at first, then more honestly than we had in years. She told me things about her marriage I had suspected but not known. I told her things about the last 4 years that I had never said to anyone, because there hadn't been anyone to say them to. We did not resolve anything that night. You can't resolve 4 years over one dinner. But something shifted. Some weight that had been fixed in the air between us began to move. When we walked out to the parking lot, Ivy stopped at her car and turned to me. I'm sorry, Dad, she said. Not the careful, strategic sorry of someone who wants something. A different kind. The kind that costs something. I know, I said. She drove away and I stood there a minute in the September air, listening to the quiet that follows when something that has been held too tight for too long is finally released. Miles called that Sunday, as he always does. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Dad, are you okay? Yeah, I said. Actually, yeah, I think I am. The cabin is beautiful in October. The leaves on the ridge go orange and gold, and a particular shade of red that I have no name for. I drove up there the weekend after the dinner and sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the light change on the mountains. Pauline would have loved it. I think she would have been proud of how I handled things. Not because I won anything, I don't feel like I won, but because I stopped waiting for someone to decide I was worth showing up for. Because I protected what we built, what she worked for, what she gave 11 years of Saturdays to an organization that makes kids' lives better. Because when my daughter looked at me across a restaurant table and I could see her trying to find her way back from somewhere she'd been lost, I left the door open. I'm not waiting by it anymore. But it's open. That feels like enough.